Alright, so below Davidic or Maccabean Messiah, there's an apocalyptic prophet. Now when you hear apocalypse, you should think apocalypse, end of the world. Like I said before, the book of Revelation or the Revelation to John, or sometimes it's simply called Revelation or Revelations, is an apocalyptic text. It's about what will happen at the end of the world. You know, from time to time, there are groups that come forward and say the end is near. You know, this is what you need to do to get prepared for the end of the world. Well, there were lots of these apocalyptic prophets claiming that the end of the world was near in this time period. What were people expecting? Well, some people were expecting a new king to rise up, a new Messiah or a new Christ. Other people were expecting apocalyptic prophets, and there were apocalyptic prophets who were rising up and saying the end of the world is near, the end of the world is near, you need to get right with God or you'll be destroyed when the apocalypse comes. What else might they be expecting? If you look at the third thing, a new Moses. Well, as you probably have heard the Moses story a little bit before, not in this class, but I hope that most of you have at least heard of Moses before. There's a story of the Israelites are enslaved long ago by the Egyptians, and Moses goes to the Pharaoh and says, "Pharaoh, let my people go." And the Pharaoh says no, so God sends plagues. There are 10 plagues. And finally the Pharaoh gives up and says, "Your God is too great. Go ahead and take your people. You guys can go." And Moses and the people leave Egypt. And one of the first things they do once they're out of Egypt is Moses goes up on Mount Sinai and God gives him the 10 Commandments, right? You see the picture of Moses holding the 10 Commandments, these 2 tablets of stone when he comes down the mountain. Well, if you look in the Torah, which is the first part of the Tanakh, remember Tanakh, T-N-K, Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim. The T stands for Torah, and Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy are the 5 books in the Torah. Well, that contains the laws that Moses received up on Mount Sinai. Starting in Exodus, there's, you know, the story says, and Moses went up on the mountain, and he came back down, and these are the laws that God gave him. Now, those are called the laws, or sometimes the laws are simply referred to as the Torah. Well, Moses received the Torah. In the first century, people were looking for new interpretations of the law or new interpretations of the Torah. Now, if you read carefully, you would see that which which group in the first century was offering new interpretations of the Torah. It wasn't the Sadducees, it was the Pharisees. The Pharisees were trying to apply the Torah to everyday life, because of course the Torah has requirements for what you do at temple. You go down to temple, you sacrifice some doves, etc. But the Pharisees wanted to ask themselves, how can we serve God as best as we possibly can? How can we apply the Torah outside of merely the temple? And they came up with long lists of how you might be able to additionally serve God in your everyday life. Now, this oversimplifies things, but this is the basic idea. There were people offering new interpretations of the Torah. And in a sense, they were like new Moseses, right? Moses brought down the law, and now we have new figures who are offering new interpretations of the law. Jesus offers a new interpretation of the law in the Gospel of Matthew, and we'll talk about that when we read Matthew. There's nothing particularly unique about this. The Pharisees were doing the exact same thing. One of the famous things that Jesus says was, the essence of the law is to love God and love your neighbor. Jesus isn't the only person during this time period who said that. There was a Jewish figure named Hillel, who is roughly a contemporary of Jesus, who said the exact same thing. The essence of the law is to love God and love your neighbor. So there were lots of people thinking, okay, times are different than times were when Moses was around. We have to reinterpret the law to apply it in new ways. The Pharisees were doing this, Hillel was doing this, and it looks like Jesus was doing this as well. Fourth possible expectation, if you look at the fourth bulletin point here, Kingdom of God, and I have a whole slide if we move on next. Kingdom of God. What does it mean when people were expecting a kingdom of God?